To the uneducated peasant of the Empire, death is a definitive end, a quiet rest in the gardens of Moor, protected by sacred blessings and heavy stone slabs. But to those who look east toward the bleak, rain-beaten forest of Sylvania, death is nothing more than an intermission. Sylvania is a geographic scar on the face of humanity's greatest empire. Its soil is rich with warpstone dust, its skies are perpetually choked by dark storm clouds, and its ruling aristocracy possesses an insatiable, immortal thirst. These are the vampire counts. They are not mindless beasts, nor are they mindless constructs of dark magic. They are the supreme predators of the old world, brilliant, elegant, ancient, and deeply tragic. In this comprehensive video, we are going to reconstruct the entire history of the vampire race from the ground up. We will explore the forbidden sorcery of ancient Nehekhara, dissect the distinct physiological and cultural mutations of the 5 great bloodlines, recount the ruinous campaigns of the vampire wars, and analyze the specific tabletop and military mechanics that make the undead legion an unstoppable nightmare on the battlefield. Secure your silver wards, pour a warding circle of salt, and let us step out of the light of Sigmar and venture deep into the eternal night. To find the root of the vampiric curse, we must journey back thousands of years before the birth of Sigmar to the southern desert kingdom of Nehekhara. This was a civilization utterly obsessed with the afterlife. The kings built massive necropolises, believing that their physical bodies must be perfectly preserved so they could rule for eternity in the golden realm of the gods. Into this culture of ritual and monument was born Nagash, the firstborn son of the king of Khemri. Denied the throne by law, Nagash was inducted into the mortuary cult, where he quickly became an unmatched scholar of magic and medicine. But Nagash was dissatisfied with spiritual immortality. He feared his own physical decay. He feared the end of his consciousness. By torturing captured dark elven sorcerers, Nagash synthesized their chaotic magic with the traditional death rituals of the mortuary cult. Through this unholy fusion, he created a fundamentally new school of magic, necromancy. Nagash deduced that the physical body was merely a vessel powered by life energy, and that this energy could be artificially bound to flesh using warpstone and human blood. He distilled these findings into the elixir of life. This potion granted him agelessness, immense magical power, and unparalleled physical strength. To fund this horrific research and build his iconic Black Pyramid, Nagash turned Khemri into a tyrannical slave state, slaughtering thousands to fuel his dark enchantments. Horrified by this blasphemy and terrified of his growing power, the remaining priest-kings of Nehekhara formed an unprecedented grand coalition. After decades of total meat-grinder warfare, they breached Khemri, smashed Nagash's armies, and drove the great necromancer out into the howling desert wastes, believing him dead. But Nagash's dark legacy was a poison that could not be easily purged. A collection of his forbidden skin-bound spellbooks, the infamous 9 Books of Nagash, was smuggled away during the sack of Khemri. They found their way into the hands of Queen Neferata of the coastal kingdom of Lamia. Neferata was a brilliant, ambitious ruler who looked upon the aging process with absolute revulsion. She gathered a secret cabal of the city's most trusted nobles, warriors, and scholars to decipher Nagash's notes. Neferata sought to recreate the elixir of life, but she lacked Nagash's raw magical genius and his exact laboratory conditions. To bridge the gap, she altered the formula, infusing the mixture with pure sphinx venom and dark magical catalysts. When Neferata drank the perfected solution, her heart stopped beating forever. Her skin turned to flawless marble, her senses sharpened to a supernatural degree, and she became faster than the human eye could track. She had successfully conquered death, but her flawed formula carried a catastrophic side effect, an insatiable, painful, burning hunger for fresh human blood. Neferata had become the first vampire. To cement her grip on Lamia and create an unbreakable inner circle of immortal lieutenants, Neferata shared her curse. She bestowed the blood kiss, the ritualistic draining of a mortal's blood followed by the forced consumption of the vampire's own tainted lifeblood, upon 11 chosen nobles of her court. Among this inner circle were some of the most influential figures in undead history. Abarash, the supreme captain of her palace guard. Usharan, her fiercely loyal brother and political advisor. Wusaring, a deeply sinister sorcerer who had assisted in translating Nagash's texts. And Vashanesh, a powerful prince of a mysterious origin who possessed a unique, dark charisma. For decades, Lamia functioned as a hidden kingdom of apex predators. The human population was treated like prized cattle, pampered, protected, and systematically drained in secret, silver-gilded blood feasts. However, the vampires grew arrogant. They underestimated the vigilance of the neighboring mortal kingdoms. When the priest-kings of the West discovered that Lamia was ruled by a cabal of immortal blood drinkers, they declared a holy war. Led by the stern and yielding King Alcatazar, a massive coalition army marched upon Lamia. Despite the supernatural speed and necromantic powers of the vampire lords, they were utterly overwhelmed by numbers. Lamia was systematically sacked. Its beautiful marble libraries were burnt to ash, and its grand temples were leveled. The 7 surviving vampire lords, along with their scattered broods of lesser thralls, were cast out into the wilderness. They were forced to flee northward across the mountains and into the wild, untamed territories of the Old World, carrying the dark curse of Lamia into the heart of human civilization. As the surviving vampire lords scattered across the globe, their physical forms, magical capabilities, and psychological motivations began to drastically drift apart. Deprived of the unifying culture of Lamia, the curse mutated based on how each lord chose to survive, fracturing the vampire race into 5 distinct, competing bloodlines. The von Carsteins represent the absolute pinnacle of vampiric nobility and political ambition. This line was founded by Vashanesh, who would later change his name to Vlad von Carstein. The von Carsteins do not see themselves as hidden parasites or wild monsters. They see themselves as the natural, divinely ordained rulers of humanity. They retain their human appearance perfectly, possessing a terrifying hypnotic beauty and immense charm. They are masters of traditional statecraft, military strategy, and tactical manipulation, but beneath their velvet robes lies the raw fury of the apex predator. They hold a unique spiritual connection to the dark forces of nature, granting them the ability to command great swarms of bats, summon packs of dire wolves, and call down unnatural storms to choke the skies before their armies march. Following the fall of her beloved city, Queen Neferata fled to the Silver Pinnacle, an ancient, hollowed-out dwarf hole in the World's Edge Mountains. There, she established the Lamian Sisterhood. Alamians completely reject open military conflict, preferring to weaponize secrecy, seduction, and political subversion. They recruit exclusively from the most beautiful, intelligent daughters of human nobility across the Empire, Bretonnia, and Tilia. Operating as elegant courtesans, mysterious widows, and influential advisors within the highest echelons of mortal society, the Lamians use their hypnotic powers and extensive blackmail networks to steer the fates of empires. A human duke might believe he is making a sovereign political decision, completely unaware that his favorite mistress is a Lamian vampire who has been subtly altering his mind for decades. The Blood Dragons are defined entirely by the martial ethos of their founder, Abarash. When Lamia fell, Abarash was driven to despair by the predatory nature of his hunger. He refused to feed upon weak, defenseless mortals, viewing it as an act of absolute cowardice. He swore an oath to find a way to conquer the thirst through martial excellence. After centuries of wandering, Abarash climbed to the peak of a massive, active volcano and challenged a colossal red dragon to single combat. After a titanic multi-day duel, Abarash slew the beast, tore open its throat, and drank its magical boiling blood. The sheer magical potency of the dragon's blood permanently extinguished his thirst, freeing him from the need to hunt humans. Abarash ordered his descendants, the Blood Dragons, to dedicate their eternal lives to the absolute mastery of the blade. They live as wandering knights, martial monks, and elite duelists. They reject political schemes and necromantic spellcasting, choosing instead to clad themselves in heavy, blood-red plate armor and seek out the greatest mortal warriors and monsters in the world to test their skills in honorable combat. Founded by the deeply misanthropic scholar Warsarin, the Necrarchs have completely abandoned any pretense of retaining their human dignity or appearance. They view vampirism not as a curse of blood, but as a supreme gateway to absolute magical knowledge. Necrarchs lock themselves away in isolated, trap-filled towers, desolate swamps, and forgotten necropolises, dedicating every second of their eternal lifespans to the study of dark magic, astronomy, and alchemy. Over centuries of exposure to raw dar magic and corpse dust, their bodies warp into horrific skeletal husks with elongated fingers, glowing eyes, and hairless, rotting flesh. They are the most powerful necromancers among the vampire races, capable of raising entire cities of the dead with a single spoken incantation. They hold a deep, burning hatred for all living things and dream of transforming the entire world into a silent, orderly graveyard where they can study their magic in peace. The Strigoi are the most tragic and monstrous of all the bloodlines. They were once part of a glorious and enlightened vampire kingdom known as Strigos, founded in the southern plains by the noble lord Usharon. Strigos was a place where humans and vampires coexisted in a highly organized, symbiotic society. However, this drew the envy of the other vampire lines, who covertly orchestrated its downfall by guiding a massive, unstoppable orc Wog directly into the kingdom's heart. Usharon was slain, and his surviving descendants were scattered across the old world. Hunted relentlessly by human witch hunters and betrayed by their fellow vampires, the Strigoi were forced to hide in the deepest, foulest corners of the world, city sewers, ancient crypts, and shallow battle graves. Deprived of fresh, warm blood, they resort to feeding on old, rotten corpses. Over centuries, this foul diet and deep psychological trauma mutated them into enormous, hunched, bestial abominations. They possess no speech, no noble titles, and no elegant clothes, only an unyielding, animalistic rage and a desperate desire to tear apart anyone who dares intrude upon their subterranean domains. For centuries, the vampires of the old world operated strictly in the shadows, keeping their numbers low to avoid drawing the unified wrath of the human empire. But in the year 1797 of the imperial calendar, the strategy of secrecy was completely shattered and an age of open warfare began. The catalyst for this shift was Sylvania. Sylvania had long been the most neglected, backward, and miserable province within the empire. It was a place of dark superstition, swampy terrain, and deep poverty, ruled over by the cruel and confident human noble family known as the Von Drax. When the ruling count, Otto von Drac, lay on his deathbed without a male heir, he cursed the gods, swearing he would rather marry his beautiful daughter Isabella to a demon than allow his hated brothers to inherit his lands. As if summoned by the curse, a mysterious, imposing foreign nobleman arrived at Castle Drakenhof that very night. He introduced himself as Vlad von Carstein. He possessed an ancient, aristocratic bearing, flawless manners, and an underlying aura of absolute authority. Desperate to deny his brothers, the dying count married Isabella to Vlad on the spot. The moment the ceremony was completed, Otto von Drac passed away, and Vlad von Carstein became the undisputed ruler of Sylvania. Vlad proved to be an incredibly efficient, surprisingly popular ruler. He systematically hunted down the corrupt bandits that plagued the highways, built sturdy stone roads, and established a rigid, unyielding legal system. The human peasants of Sylvania quickly realized that while their new lord was cold and demanded absolute obedience, he was far fairer than the tyrannical von Drax who preceded him. When Isabella fell terminally ill with a wasting disease, Vlad refused to let the grave take her. He bestowed the blood kiss upon her, binding her to him for eternity. Their marriage became one of the most legendary romances in the history of the old world, a genuine, deep emotional bond built on mutual respect and shared immortal ambition. For over 2 centuries, Vlad and Isabella quietly transformed Sylvania. They systematically replaced the human nobility with loyal, low-tier vampire thralls and necromancers. They allowed the dark magic of the land to pool and fester, turning the province into a massive dormant military base. Vlad was patiently waiting for the perfect geopolitical opportunity to strike. That opportunity arrived when the Empire fractured into the Age of Three Emperors, a bitter, multi-decade civil war that left humanity divided, exhausted, and leaderless. In the year 2010 of the Imperial calendar, Vlad dropped his disguise. He brutally executed the visiting Imperial tax collectors, raised his black banners over Castle Drakenhof, and unleashed the First Vampire War. Vlad's military campaign was a masterclass in psychological terror and logistical perfection. His armies did not require food lines, baggage trains, or medical tents. As his legions marched, his dark sorcerers performed massive, rolling rituals that raised every single casualty from previous skirmishes straight back onto their feet. Every human soldier who fell fighting the von Carsteins would rise minutes later, their eyes glowing with unholy magic, forcing their former comrades to fight them. Furthermore, Vlad appeared to be completely, inexplicably invincible. In battle after battle, Imperial generals would successfully coordinate targeted strikes to take him down. At the Battle of Schwarzenhofen, he was impaled through the chest by a great sword. At the Battle of Blumhof, he was struck down by a direct cannon shot to the torso. Yet, mere hours later, Vlad would be seen at the front lines of the next engagement, completely unblemished, laughing as his sword reaped human lives. The terrifying secret to this immortality was the Carstein ring, an incredibly powerful, ancient artifact that Vlad had brought with him from the south. The moment Vlad's physical body suffered a mortal blow, the ring would instantly draw his soul back from the ethereal realm and stitch his flesh back together, making him entirely immune to permanent destruction. By 2051, Vlad's unstoppable undead hosts reached the capital city of Altdorf. The grand siege lasted for months. The city was on the absolute brink of starvation, its walls crumbling under the relentless assault of heavy zombie battering rams and flying swarms of bats. Desperate to uncover the secret of Vlad's invulnerability, the Grand Theogenist Wilhelm, leader of the cult of Sigmar, turned to the Empire's master thief, a man named Felix Mann. Under the cover of a moonless night, Mann performed the ultimate heist. He snuck out of the city gates, bypassed the tight security of the undead encampment, scaled the walls of Vlad's personal silk pavilion, and slipped the Carstein ring off the sleeping vampire lord's finger. The next morning, when Vlad discovered the theft, he flew into a state of absolute unbridled fury. Knowing his time was limited, he ordered a reckless, all-out final assault on the walls of Altdorf. Vlad fought like a demon possessed, scaling the battlements and slaughtering dozens of elite-grade swords single-handedly. Seeing his defenses collapsing, Grand Theogenist Wilhelm made the ultimate sacrifice. He broke through the melee, tackled Vlad von Carstein off the top of the high stone ramparts, and dragged them both down onto a sharp, wooden defensive stake driven into the ground below. Without the protective magic of the Carstein ring, the wooden stake pierced Vlad's heart, ending his unholy life permanently. Across the battlefield, the sudden loss of Vlad's immense willpower caused the binding spells to shatter. Skeletons collapsed into piles of bone, and zombies melted into puddles of rot. When Isabella von Carstein realized her husband was truly dead, she refused to face eternity alone. Rather than be captured by the vengeful Imperial forces, she threw herself onto a wooden stake, turning her physical body to ash. The destruction of Vlad did not secure a permanent peace for the Empire. The mantle of Sylvanian leadership fell to his surviving, deeply flawed vampire progeny, sparking the second and third vampire lords. The first to take the mantle was Conrad von Carstein, otherwise known as the Mad Count. Conrad was a violent psychopath who lacked any shred of Vlad's political brilliance, tactical restraint, or strategic vision. He went to war simply because he loved the taste of blood and the sensation of slaughter. He routinely executed his own necromancers out of paranoid rages, leading to an erratic, unstable army that was eventually cornered and crushed by a combined alliance of dwarfs and Imperial forces at the Battle of the Grim Moor. The second to take the mantle was Manfred von Carstein, otherwise known as the Arch-Schemer. Manfred was the most dangerous of Vlad's successors. He was a master of both physical combat and advanced magical manipulation, having spent centuries traveling the world to study ancient necromantic scrolls in Nehekhara and Cathay. Manfred bided his time for decades, allowing the Empire to falsely believe Sylvania would have returned to a harmless state. When he struck, he nearly captured Altdorf a second time. However, Manfred's downfall came from his own hubris and overwhelming arrogance. He was eventually outmaneuvered, trapped, and cut down at the Battle of Fenn by Count Martin of Stirling, seemingly ending the von Carstein threat forever. Yet, as any student of Sylvanian history knows, a vampire story is rarely finished just because they have been put into the ground. To field a vampire count's army on the tabletop, or understand the tactical doctrine and the lore, is to pilot an army that completely breaks the standard rules of engagement found in Warhammer. They do not fight like mortals, and they cannot be beaten like mortals. Let's break down the core universal mechanics that dictate their battlefield presence. Every single core unit within a vampire count's army, from the humblest mindless zombie to the most elite armored graveguard, possesses the undead special rule. This means they are completely immune to psychology. They do not care about casualties, they cannot be intimidated, they never take panic tests, and they will never, under any circumstance, break formation and flee the battlefield. However, this absolute resolve comes with a devastating mechanical drawback, the unstable rule. If an undead unit loses a combat encounter, they do not run. Instead, the psychic instability caused by losing the combat resolution actively disrupts the dark magic holding their physical forms together. For every point by which the unit lost the combat, additional models instantly crumble into dust, representing the magical bonds tearing apart under tactical pressure. The absolute linchpin of any vampire count's roster is the army general, who must always be a licensed wizard capable of casting the lore of vampires or necromancy. The general acts as a literal power station for the entire army, projecting their immense willpower across the battlefield to keep the dead animated. If the general is slain mid-battle, a catastrophic mechanical event occurs. The entire army must immediately begin taking leadership tests at the start of every turn. Every unit that fails their test will begin rapidly crumbling into dust, representing the slow, agonizing dissipation of the binding magic. Protecting the general while aggressively hunting the enemy's commanders is the alpha and omega of undead strategy. Talk briefly about strategic unit archetypes, starting with zombies and skeletal warriors. These units possess abysmal offensive statistics and paper-thin defensive armor. However, they are dirt cheap to field and can be deployed in massive blocks of 40 to 60 models. Their sole tactical purpose is to tie down the enemy's most expensive elite killing units in endless, agonizing melee grinds. Next up are the Graveguard, the ancient, long-dead wights of Sylvanian kings. Unlike fragile skeletons, Graveguard are clad in heavy iron plate armor, wield devastating magical white blades that cause lethal, armor-piercing wounds, and act as an immovable defensive line that can take immense punishment. Next up, we have the Blood Knights and Terrorgeists. Once a unit has been successfully trapped by a zombie tar pit, i.e. zombies and skeletal warriors, the vampire counts unleash their elite shock troops. Blood Knights are arguably the most powerful heavy cavalry units in the entire game. Vampiric shock knights who hit with the force of a runaway train. They are accompanied by Terrorgeists, massive bat-like undead monsters that fly over the front lines and emit a piercing magical banshee shriek that bypasses physical armor entirely, destroying the enemy's leadership from within. Though the armies of the Empire have marched into Sylvania multiple times, burning down dark temples, purifying corrupt graveyards, and putatively executing the aristocratic elite, the true tragedy of Empire counts is that they can never be fully eradicated. They are woven directly into the fabric of the old world's destiny. They remain hidden away in secret mountain keeps, waiting patiently in subterranean crypts, or quietly manipulating cords from behind silk curtains. They possess the one weapon that mortal men completely lack: absolute, infinite time. They understand that empires will rise, emperors will argue, and human alliances will crumble under the weight of time. And when the living grow weak, distracted, and divided once more, the dark soil of Sylvania will churn. The ancient stone sarcophagi will slide open, and the Lords of Midnight will march again to claim their birthright. Because in the grimdark universe of Warhammer, the grave is not an ending. It is simply a barracks waiting for its general. Which of the 5 great bloodlines do you pledge your loyalty to? Do you prefer the aristocratic grandeur of von Carstein, the martial perfection of the Blood Dragons, or the horrific magical purity of the Necrocs? Let me know your tactical strategies and favorite lore stories in the comments section down below. Make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more exhaustive, grimdark historical breakdowns, and keep your torches burning bright against the shadows. Thank you for watching, and remember, death is only the beginning.